KHQN 1480 in Spanish Fork.
Good morning, listeners. This is Senator Wayne Niederhauser, President of the Utah Senate, here with our weekly show, the Utah Legislative Update, your source for policy information from Capitol Hill. This is KHQN 1480 Radio. You can also get our show at utahtalkradio.com. We invite you also to participate in our discussion today. We're going to be talking about federalism. You can call in at 1-800-776-1913. It's my pleasure to have with me today Representative Ken Ivory. I got to know Ken many years ago working in community affairs in Sandy City. Ken is an attorney from Arizona, I believe. We'll have him introduce himself here in a minute, but has been what I would call a rock star in the Utah legislature, one of the few people in America that really understand the legalities of this issue of where the line is, and he'll probably talk a little bit about where the line is because that is one of his been one of his themes. He's just gotten back from Atlanta. The National Conference of Legislative members were there, and he gave a rousing speech on federalism. Welcome, Representative.
President.
It's good to have you here on our show this morning. So, first of all, tell us about yourself briefly and the area that you represent.
Thanks, President. Great to be here. Boy, it's been a busy couple of weeks, couple of months. I was born in central Utah, Sanpete.
Okay, all right.
And
grew up
in Arizona. We moved here from Las Vegas about 15 years ago. Spent a number of years in Japan. Used to work for the mayor of the city of Osaka in Japan, and I represent District 47, which is essentially the south half of West Jordan, little South Jordan. Tiny, one precinct in Midvale.
So you were elected, I think, almost 4 years ago, and probably about your first or second session, you were already moving towards some real effort on what we call federalism. And federalism is a word that sometimes people get confused. That what is the meaning of federalism? Some people think that it's more power to the federal government. What is the definition?
Yeah, it's a great place to start. It is very often confused. It's a term of art that our founders knew quite well. In short, federalism means that our unprecedented system of government is a governing partnership. And federalism is having balance in that governing partnership. And as you know better, that partnership is incredibly out of balance. We have a federal government that has grown beyond all of its bounds and treating the states as if they were administrative subdivisions, as if we're subordinates, when in fact it was the states that created the federal government, not the other way around.
And there's design in the Constitution, correct, that there would be a line, a jurisdictional line between the what the states would have control over and what the federal government would have control over.
Yeah, that's really critical. It starts kind of with the 10th Amendment, where it says all things not delegated to the United States nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. We look in civics and we think if we know executive, legislative, judicial, and we call that checks and balances, and we think we know government, and put the gold on our forehead and off we go. Well, that's a single republic, and as they said in the Federalist Papers 51, in the compound Republic of America, the power is divided among two distinct governments, and they control each other as a double security to the rights of the people. That's what was so ingenious about our system of government. It had horizontal checks, vertical checks to control and curb what they knew was the natural tendency of men in government to amass unbridled power, and so the states were a critical check and are supposed to be a critical check to the federal government consolidating and running amok, which is the natural tendency of all history.
Fundamentally, then, the founders of our country and those framers of the Constitution, having just fought a civil or a revolutionary war to relieve themselves of oppressive central government, they wanted to create a check and balance between the states and the federal government so that one would not override the other, so that we'd have a union, but also we wouldn't have a powerful central government. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. You know, in fact, in the early days, I can't remember who exactly said it. It may have been John Adams. I think it was John Adams. But he said, I'm at a loss to know what the federal officers are even going to do. We delegated so few powers to the federal government, I'm really at a loss to know what they're going to be doing all day, because all of the real governing power is in the states. And that was after the Constitution was ratified.
He'd be surprised today, wouldn't he?
He'd be tremendously surprised. You know better than anyone that now you've got federal criminalization, right? There's actually a book that was written that Alan Dershowitz wrote the foreword to that's called 3 Felonies a Day. And so they estimate that the average person, now of course you're way above average, the average person commits 3 federal felonies a day.
We've created a web of rules it's tripping us all up at some place, or in one way or another.
Yeah, so in addition to federal felonies, you know, there were only 3 federal felonies authorized in the Constitution: treason, piracy, and counterfeiting. They quit counting federal felonies at 5,000. The American Bar Association, the Department of Justice can't tell you how many federal felonies there are anymore. And they no longer have a criminal intent. You know, it used to be you couldn't be a felon, a criminal, unless you had specific criminal intent. Well, that's gone as well. So now you can be a federal felon with no intent to even commit a crime, without even knowing that what you did was a crime.
So this was a great effort. Our Constitution was there to create checks and balances, to stop bad things from happening, to help preserve our freedom. Is this a partisan issue?
Well, no. And
is this a Democrat? Is this just a Republican issue, or is this a Democrat? Is this a libertarian issue? How would you frame that?
Well, the Supreme Court a year ago, in fact, in the Obamacare decision, the Supreme Court said this idea of federalism, this system design of federalism, is to protect the liberty of the individual. Well, I don't know that the liberty of the individual is a partisan issue by any means. Look at the No Child Left Behind. I think that's widely hated by everyone, that we don't need a centralized education system, rather to take off the handcuffs and let principals, teachers, and parents control the education of their children.
Local control.
Yeah, exactly. You look at the fiscal issues, right? $17 trillion debt. Utah, we get something on the order of 40 cents of every dollar we spend comes from a federal government that's broke. Those fiscal issues, you know, we're all going to have to be engaged in educating our children, taking care of sick and poor people, public safety. Certainly not a partisan issue.
Well, I'm surprised here at a quote. We've got to go to break, but we'll discuss this quote in the first part of our next segment from Theodore Roosevelt. I was surprised about that. We'll look forward to having some further discussion. We want to remind everyone that you can call in at 1-800-776-1930. This is Representative Ivory and Senator Wayne Niederhauser, Utah Legislative Update.